Excellent. Thank you, everybody. We will call our December 17th, 2024 meeting to order. And first item on our agenda is to entertain motions for possible executive session.
I motion to enter into executive session for the purpose of discussions regarding proposal, pending or current litigation, collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of the Civil Service Law, and matters leading to the appointment, employment, promotion, demotion, discipline, suspension, dismissal, or removal of a particular person or corporation.
Second.
Moved by Karen, second by Jill. Debate, discussion, questions. We will call the question. All in favor? That is unanimous for the folks who are present. We are going to do our best to be back by 7. It will most likely be 7:05 or 7:10, just giving folks a heads up, and we will see you shortly. Fantastic. And we are going to the board when we come out state, right? We will continue on with our agenda. Are there any modifications to the agenda? Hearing none, we will continue on with the agenda, which brings us to public comment. I feel compelled to remind folks of our public comment. I'm sure everyone has read the policy, but we avoid names, and if folks go over the 3 limits, I will do my best to politely interject, though we'll never cut anybody off if they're close to completing their comments. We would ask if folks would come down to one of the microphones so folks could hear online. It helps with the recording and for posterity. My colleague, Dr. Krantweiss, will read names. Please give grace. Names are oftentimes difficult to read depending on pronunciation. So you may have all these. I will find out in a minute, Adam.
Yeah, me too.
Before people speak, please also understand that there are times where the board is not able to give a response this evening, but at some point in time, someone will get back to you to let you know that we have heard what you have spoken to us. So with that being said, Dr. Krantweiss.
Okay. And if I mispronounce your name, when you come down, you can just say it correctly, please. Justine Vosloo is the first name.
You got it. I'm here to speak about our PTA initiative to provide air purifiers.
Justine, my apologies. We want to make, is the mic on? My apologies. Thank you. There we go.
Okay. So I'm here to speak about our PTA initiative to provide air purifiers to classrooms at South Hill Elementary School. As parents and teachers, we know how often our kids get sick at school. It's a lot, and it's disruptive, both to us as well as to their learning experiences. We can significantly reduce airborne illness by increasing the number of times that air is changed out in classrooms. These air changes can come from bringing outdoor air in through ventilation and can be effectively enhanced by using portable HEPA air purifiers. Research has shown that increasing the number of air changes per hour to 6 by adding air purifiers can help reduce the transmission of illness by over 80% in a classroom. 6 air changes per hour means the air is changed over every 10 minutes or so, and coincide with the ideal air change rate specified in recommendations by the Harvard Healthy Buildings Program, dated back to 2020. The American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers, also known as ASHRAE, released the ASHRAE 241 guidelines in June 2023 that recommends 6 air changes per hour as a minimum target for infectious disease control in schools. And as of last month, November 2024, the EPA and the CDC and California Department of Public Health all recommended at least 5 air changes per schools per hour to address infectious disease. Yet our schools only achieve 3 air changes per hour. Adding air purifiers can provide these 2 to 3 air changes per hour needed to help us reach the minimum target of 6 air changes per hour. Upgrading HVAC is costly, and we are not asking for that. In fact, we're not asking for any financial support from the district. Instead, as a PTA, all we ask is approval from ICSD and the Board of Ed to allow our teachers and staff to be able to use the air purifiers that we will provide in their classrooms if they desire that. Air purifiers are a low-cost, accessible tool that can be deployed to improve indoor air quality for classrooms immediately. School districts around the country have been using air purifiers to help their kids stay healthy. For example, Boston Public Schools, who upgraded HVAC systems and added air purifiers to every classroom to reach the 6 to 7 air changes per hour as recommended. And they also implemented real-time indoor air quality monitoring that can be accessed by parents. And the state of Connecticut recently approved over $11 million to provide an air purifier for every classroom in their state. Given that these recommendations are proven to be effective, evidence-based, and acted upon by districts around the country, parents would be within their rights to ask, why not for our kids and why not for our schools? And so I stand here to deliver the petition to you all, asking you to please approve our initiative and permit teachers to act and to be able to use the air purifiers in their classrooms to provide a clean and healthy learning environment for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Steve Manley.
The largest liar on my way here. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Stephen Manley. I am a parent of 3 students in and throughout the district. I'm the parent of a 6th grader who made the decision to try Waldorf education this year, a parent of a 3rd grader at BJM, and a parent of a kindergartner at Bell Sherman. I'm here tonight to speak to you and ask you to give your support to BJM as well as you do to all of our schools. Last week, I was inspired by a co-parent and a friend, Summer Killian, who spoke to you about her experience in various schools. I've had a similar experience with my kiddos across the district. Students and their families across the district, I believe, deserve to know what they can expect from their schools. And I believe that our schools look like the communities they serve, but there should be some balance in the expectations of what our teachers, what our schools, what our staff and families all can understand in expectation. And I want to talk for a moment, especially around communication. Parents at BJM have asked, what can we expect from our building leaders? And I've been a parent there since 2019, and we've asked every year. Parents have said, what can we do to help in communication, in sharing information about the great things that are happening in that building and about the times where the building and the classrooms need support? The parents want to help. The teachers are amazing. The staff care about the school. But the wildly different experience of communication that I have received with students at Bell Sherman, with students at BJM, and now with a student in a Waldorf school are so varied as to feel beyond something that is simply leader-driven. It seems as if there is not a clear expectation from our district to help our new leaders, or all of our leaders, know what they can do, what they should do, what they could do and improve on to share information about our schools, about what's happening, the tough and the amazing, because both of those things happen every day in every building across our district. Some of our building leaders are amazing and practiced at communicating both of those things. Others of our building leaders are new to doing and becoming amazing at those things. And I would ask that as a board, you work with Dr. Brown, with our superintendent and his team, ask questions and develop expectations and supports so that teachers and families, students and parents can enter into any building and have, in general, a guided understanding of what communication can look like, with the asterisk that every building looks like its community, and every building leader is a different human with different skills, different talents, and different methods that they use. I am incredibly impressed by the staff of BJM and by Bell Sherman. and by so many of the other staff members that many of you know I've had the opportunity to work with and next to. Thank you for your time. I encourage you to help set some standards to help us as families know what we can expect more consistently in every building.
Our next speaker up is Haley Jossinger. Yes.
It's Haley Dossinger with a D.
Oh, Jossinger.
Yes. Is this guy on? Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know why I said yes. Okay. Oh, yes, okay. Hi, I'm Haley Dossinger. I have been working at BJM in either A+, which is the BJM after school, or as a sub in the building certain times of the year for the past 18 years. I have been a parent of 2 children who are or were BJM students for the past 14 years. We live just 2.5 blocks from the school. BJM is our neighborhood school and part of our community. I recently bumped into a new neighbor who has a school-age child, and they have open enrolled their child in another school because they heard BJM was struggling. This saddened me. I do not want to keep hearing stories of teachers or ESPs or families who have left or plan to leave BJM. I love BJM. I have for the past all the years I've been involved with BJM. I want all kids at BJM to thrive, not just survive. I do not know the answer, nor do I have a clear picture of what the solution would be. But I ask you as a district to help us find the path to the BJM we all choose. The dedication I see every day I walk into the school is immense. Staff working to get subs into the right places, teachers working to keep students engaged and learning and feeling seen and loved. ESP is going above and beyond to keep their students safe and happy and having a smooth day, as smooth as they can. As we look forward, we need to look at teacher retention, ESP retention, and keep our families in our school. We need experienced teachers as role models to the new teachers coming in. We can't just have a school full of new teachers. We got to keep the teachers we have that have been there and are dedicated to the school and do everything we can to have them be happy. We need to fund building subs because they know the students the best. They watch the students as they grow from K to 5th grade. We need to value our ESPs because their role is as important as any in the school building. Let us move forward to build our BJM community and strive for the best we can. Thank you for being here.
Our final speaker for tonight is Michael Hayes.
Good evening. My name is Michael Hayes. I'm here to ask the board to put on the agenda for next month approval of the new Tompkins County low-income scale for property tax, similar to a year ago. I'm a taxpayer. My wife's disabled. We are low income. And every bit of that helps. Tompkins County made a lot smaller adjustment this year. It's only a $1,500 change. So the economic impact to the school district is likely to be minimal. And I'd be glad to send all the materials in advance of January for you to review and to speak at the meeting in January. That's it.
Adam, is that all our speakers?
Yes.
Thank you. Board responses. Fantastic. Thank you to everyone who's come to speak with us this evening. We will be following up with additional conversations and to The last request, I think my immediate recommendation would be that we put that on a finance committee agenda to start, not to put that work on Dr. Blaylock's table. But that would be the best place to begin that conversation for us as we move forward, as it would have budget implications. So I assume the two of you will connect and we can have that conversation there. And any additional information you want to send will be our way as well. Great, thank you. That brings us to our student reps.
Evening. Our first thing is that the choir concert was last week and it was absolutely magical, I've heard. And the ICSD bands have their winter concert tomorrow in Culp Auditorium at 7:30 p.m., featuring several chamber groups, concert band, and wind ensemble. And our director, Ms. Zowell, was also recently named the music teacher who makes a difference of New York State by the School Band and Orchestra magazine. And 15 members of a new club, Music Conamore, performed at Beech Tree this past Sunday, and then talked to residents and helped to serve lunch. They even honored requests after performing what they had rehearsed. And the students specifically started this club to bring the joy of music to those in our community who cannot attend concerts. And after a very memorable first show, they hope to reach out to other senior centers in the coming year. And as we've entered in the winter season, there's been a rising need for substitute teachers in our classes. And so yesterday on the Monday, we had a lot of fail to fill classes and an overwhelming email sent out to our teachers about covering for other classes as well. And so we understand that it's very difficult to solve this issue quickly, but we do hope that there are efforts made so that all of our classes get adult supervision. And we want to recognize the staff in our Welcome Center who have been stepping up to cover some of these classes.
Hi, everybody. Good night or good evening. So we have a new recycling program that's going to be going online hopefully in the next couple of weeks. It's for paper only. I know I keep mentioning this, but the reason is because we're going to be making an instructional video soon, which is going to be disseminated to the entire student body. We're in the process of writing several versions of a school-wide announcement. So we hope that by the next time we speak with you guys, we'll have at least a week worth of data on this to share. Another thing we've been doing is the reading up on the Blue Ribbon Plan that's hopefully going to be discussed later tonight. I see it on the agenda. And, we may have some questions during that presentation, especially about the timeline and the certainty of the changes at the state level, as well as how much authority we would have over the specifics of their implementation. And then lastly, I had another rep mention this at the last voting meeting, which I unfortunately could not attend, but I'm very grateful for the opportunity last week to visit DeWitt Middle School, along with the high school restorative justice team and Dr. Bryman to receive training in conflict resolution from Dr. Wynn. Hopefully, I'm going to be able to attend a training at the elementary school level soon also, and I look forward to having some more conversations about these restorative justice practices with members of my school administration and potentially the board as well.
Thank you, student reps. Board responses.
I'd like to say thank you, Claire, for sharing about the student group who sang at Beech Tree. I heard them and it was very good. Thank you very much for them doing that.
Any other board responses? Thank you to our student reps. We look forward to additional information moving forward. It brings us to our next agenda item, which is the consent agenda, and we will entertain motions. And we will entertain motions.
I move to move forward to speak. I move to approve all consent agenda items listed in consent agenda, consideration of accounts, personnel report, and minutes of previous meeting as presented.
Second.
Moved by Aaron, seconded by Adam. Questions, discussion, debate? I would like to identify that the consent agenda includes a number of support from the Ithaca Public Education Initiative. We are always greatly appreciative of the work that IPEI does. thank you greatly for the long list of partnerships that are included on this agenda. Again, we are very appreciative of all of that. If there are no other questions or debate or discussion or comments, we will call the question. All in favor? It is unanimous. Thank you all very much. That is fantastic. That will bring us to Superintendent's report, Dr. Brown.
Thank you for the opportunity, Dr. Bradwell. So nice to be here. And I too wish to thank IPI. It's been 14 years. I continue to look at the amount of money that has come to our school district from our community and the leadership of IPI. And Mr. Manley, I recognize you too for your leadership for so many years. Just thank you. This is, as I've said many times before, I am not accustomed to being in a school district where people bring you money like this. So whenever I was brought up, when people give you something, you say thank you. So thank you all. And more importantly, and equally as important, now's the time of year when I want to highlight and underscore our district communication channels. Our ICSD Insider will be coming out tomorrow. And I'm asking folks to check out the webpage, the events that were mentioned already. The folks from ACS aren't here, but they had their winter festival on Friday. All of these amazing events are posted there in advance. And then the highlights and the pictures and the news briefs are also posted on the website. And as we come back from our break, we will be intensifying our budget deliberations and conversations. So I'm going to be asking folks to go to that instance on our webpage where the meetings, like last Thursday's evening's meeting, Finance Committee was one of the more impactful ones. I was not here, but I was able to watch it online. And then I had my friends and family actually go back and assess you in the ways in which it was facilitated and the information that was shared. And you said it earlier, Professor Bradwell, folks all over the country are watching our meetings for the ways in which it flows and for the information and the ways in which we engage in constructive dialogue. All of that can be found on our website, time-stamped and by category and by subject. So I'm saying this and I'm underscoring it tonight because when we get back, it's going to be a lot happening in January and February and March. And I want folks to know that you can follow it or get to it whenever you have time. And if there's any other feedback on our communication channels and the ways in which we do it, we welcome that too through our Let's Talk portal. So thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you. Greatly appreciate it. An awkward moment for me in this time is that we have two phenomenal presentations. One with a returning phenomenal administrator who's going to be joining us momentarily, and then two others administrators who've been working diligently on a cell phone policy. And with that being said, I need to excuse myself from this meeting, and so I am handing the reins over to Dr. Krantweiss, and my sincerest apologies for missing these two presentations. We look forward to watching them soon. Board colleagues, good luck this evening.
Thank you.
Have a good night, Sean.
Okay. Picking up, we have agenda item 10.1, Regionalization and Blue Ribbon Commission with Lily Talcott joining us back at the table for the first time.
Hi, everyone. I have to say it was surprisingly emotional to walk back into this building. I spent 19 years in the Ithaca City School District, and to get to come back and talk with you all this evening was a lot, and it's a real honor. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Lily Kavanaugh Talcott, and I have the great honor of serving as the district superintendent and CEO of Tompkins Seneca Tioga Boces. And I have been there for 99 days. So clearly I'm nailing it. I know all the pieces of it, right? Background? Yes. But it's been really exciting 99 days to get to work, not only in our region, but also at the state. So just drove back from Albany this afternoon. So we're going to talk a little bit today about both regionalization and the Blue Ribbon Commission. I want to start with this slide because Dr. Betty Rosa, the commissioner of the New York State Education Department, she's an incredible leader, incredible human. And all of the work that she has been leading, first as chancellor and now as the commissioner of the New York State Education Department, is firmly grounded in equity and excellence. Everything she does. right? So every initiative that you see is going to be about raising both of those, right? You cannot have one without the other. And the state education department is very clear about that. And so you're going to see a lot of threads, a lot of similar themes around promoting equitable access and opportunities for young people, regardless of zip code, regardless of opportunities that have been given, while also lifting up some of the standards and the learning experiences for young people to prepare them for a world that does not yet exist, right? So I'll start with Blue Ribbon Commission, head to regionalization, and I'll talk a little bit about the process moving forward. I will also say this presentation was exceptionally long, and I had a number of slides that you can go in and you can take a look at later if you would like to. All right. So back in 2019, we met all across the state at the 37 different BOCES. Some of us who are in this room now were actually in the room at Tompkins, Seneca, Tioga BOCES because the then commissioner was asking us to think about the ways in which graduation measures should shift. What do kids need? And how do our systems need to change in order to reflect those changing needs? There was a pandemic in the middle there, so things kind of got thrown off a little bit, but ultimately, 4 transformations have been recommended, honestly, from school districts, from kids and staff and educators and administrators and families and community members. This has all been crowdsourced. And the Board of Regents has adopted these 4 transformations, ensuring that kids they know they're going for this portrait of a graduate, that schools are redefining credits and learning experiences, so we're not just locked into the 22. They're going to sunset exit exams. That's right. Sunset Regents requirements and move to 1 New York State diploma. So these are the transformations from which the timeline and all of the activities are coming from. A lot of text on this slide. I'm not going to read it all, but I think it's important to understand that there's a really clear theory of change that all of us who work for the Department of Education are operating from. We're trying to change a really old system in order to, like I said, better meet the needs of kids for a rapidly changing world. And so operating from a common theory of change can be extremely helpful. So here's the portrait of a graduate. Has anyone seen this? You seen this? I'm sort of looking at some of the students, like, have you seen this yet? All right, great. So this portrait of a graduate is going to be finalized relatively soon, but I'm going to ask the board, what are some of the things that you notice about the portrait of a graduate? What do you notice? This is where you get to talk.
I'll start us off by saying what I said when we had school board business meeting. It's the first line, New York State graduates are ready for college, career, and civic engagement. That includes every aspect of them being part of their community.
Thank you. Well.
Certainly cultural competence is a big section of what we expect of our graduates is relatively new to me.
Thank you. Anything else? One thing I notice that a number of people bring up when we're talking about this is that out of the 7, literate across the content areas is equal. We spend a lot of time on content making sure that kids learn things and stuff. And this is certainly focused quite a bit more on the ways in which students will be prepared for life after high school. So this is linked, I think for some folks who serve on boards, who may be newer to boards, to get a sense of what it actually could look like for some of these transformations. I wanted to share this, and it's linked in there, to get a sense of some of the ways that we could move beyond standardized testing. So you'll see the current model that we have right now, everything that's over in blue. And this chart is helpful because it really outlines exactly what some of the shifts would be. So instead of having different levels of diplomas, instead there would be one, but districts could select seals and endorsements to allow students to follow an area of interest and demonstrate their knowledge and understanding in a much more performance-based type of way. As opposed to credit requirements in the regents, instead, New York State is talking about moving toward this evidence-based system, so that there are different ways for kids to show what they know or learn, or the ways in which they've learned. LECS does something like this and has for 5 decades. And so the state is looking at doing something that is more aligned with those kinds of assessment practices. And this last one is districts can't require things in addition to. One of my colleagues across the state has a district where they require all students to take and pass a swimming test before they'll give them their diploma, right? New York State is going to say you can't do that anymore, right? Kids need to meet the bare minimum, which is actually relatively rigorous, and you can't impose further requirements. So here's the timeline. And if you go to the New York State Education Department website, they're actually linked in the notes here. You can see the New York Inspires timeline that goes through very specifically all of the actions that are related to this. But ultimately, we're talking about fall of 2029. So Cademan, great question before. This is going to be a relatively long process. When you see 2029 plus, we're actually talking about another 4 years after that, because some of these changes are for freshmen, right, in 2029. So I'll pause there. Any questions about the Blue Ribbon Commission? There's a ton of other slides that are in there, but I wanted to be cognizant of time. Yeah.
2 good questions. So first of all, do we know if the complete rollout will be starting after fall 2029? Do we know what elements will be included in the 2025 to 27 installation or
Yep.
the initial implementation?
Yep. So all of that is outlined on New York Inspires, and so it's linked in that. And so, for example, finalizing the portrait of a graduate and ensuring that there are rubrics to help folks understand what that actually is. What's really interesting about this process is that it's iterative too, Cademan. So instead of saying, okay, the New York State Education Department is saying this is exactly what it's going to be, instead, it's very crowdsourced, as I said before. So educators and students and families and business owners and community members and administrators, those folks are actually the ones who are contributing to all of this. So it takes a little bit longer, but it's done in a way that is so much more inclusive and allows more voices to come to the table.
So it would be more district dependent in a sense, more community driven than a state mandate?
No, this will definitely be a state mandate, but the way in which it's developed is through those local convenings and connections and forums and things like that.
So it could vary by district slightly in the implementation.
It may, but again, if you see the full timeline, you'll see there's very specific actions.
Lily, it's a diploma for all,
Mhm.
but what about the students who do not meet those rigorous requirements?
Yes. So what Erin is talking about are students who are NYSA eligible. So New York State Alternative Assessment eligibility is determined through the Committee on Special Education, or the CSE. And NYSA eligibility is typically for young people. I say the federal government suggests that about 1% of students across the country qualify for NYSA. In New York State, it's 2.9%. So we have a little bit of a higher ratio there. And so that's part of what the department is also seeing, the ways in which it needs to be shifted. So they're listening to the field, what needs to change about that potentially as well.
Thanks.
Sure. Other questions?
So one more, just because we talk a lot about standards-based grading here. Does this
Yeah.
mean that there's going to be a statewide shift to that? What are we seeing there?
We're going to see a lot of things that align with standards-based grading for sure. Grading is still in regulation, it's still up to school districts. But it's going to be, because of the shifts in teaching and learning and the ways in which we're assessing students, not through traditional sit down, get out your pencil and take this multiple choice test, that things will be much more performance-based, and that proficiency is going to be determined instead on how you show what you know. I think it aligns with a lot of those principles, but standards-based grading is not, what New York State is saying. That's exactly what we're going to do.
Perfect. Thanks.
All right, so regionalization. If you've been reading certain articles from Long Island, you may have been hearing about regionalization in some interesting ways. In the rest of the state, I will say it's really about collective planning. And so in a lot of these conversations, I like to start with this concept, this South African and West African concept of Ubuntu. I am because we are. So our region is 10,877 kids. About half of those kids live in Ithaca and attend the Ithaca City School District. There are things that happen here that don't happen in neighboring school districts. There are also lots of things that happen in our neighboring school districts that kids in Ithaca don't have access to. And so in our conversations in our region with our superintendents and with our assistant superintendents, with our principals and all of these regional groups that we have, we're talking a lot more about the collective we. And that's really the idea behind regionalization. So, Dr. Jeff Madison, who is the Senior Deputy Commissioner for P20 Policy, who was the former district superintendent at Tompkins Seneca Tioga Boces, he has really been leading the charge around regionalization, and he's really clear there are a number of challenges that we're facing, right? And some of them are great challenges, like graduation measures initiative. That's really exciting. But a lot of districts and districts in our region are struggling with some fiscal constraints and some challenges. It's not the way that it used to be, right? And then that's then impacting kids' ability to access awesome programming. Whether it's through regional transportation, or it's through sharing classes. Kids are missing out. And so we want to have these conversations to ensure more kids have more access. So these are, certainly some of the ideas, some of the ideas and possibilities that are within regionalization, I will say that within our superintendent group, we right now are having a lot more conversations at the very beginning stages around operations. So we're talking about commissioning a regional transportation study. Right? We're starting with these things that are very concrete, that would allow for more kids to get to school on time, right, throughout our community. So you may not see some of those things yet, but those are some of the some of the bones, I think, in terms of how we're thinking about regionalization. I will say just one of the guiding principles. Regionalization is often conflated with reorganization or mergers. Those are actually two very different things, right? There's a ton of regulation around reorganization, mergers, annexation, et cetera. I'm happy to talk to you about that another time. But really specifically, regionalization is about having those conversations around kids having access to high quality programming. So there's a 10-year cycle that districts have the option to participate in. And really it's just having conversations and working together among our 9 school districts to engage in some planning together. No district is required to do it. And every district has to sign off on what parts of any plan that's designed they want to participate in. So say Ithaca and Newfield want to share something, right? Say it's a regional food service situation, right? And Lansing doesn't want to participate in it, that's fine, right? I will say that in Ithaca, if we look at some of the enrollment trends, so I pulled your data over the last 10 years. So you could understand there's, if we look at the 20-year overall enrollment, it's dropped 11%. But the needs and the population and the fabulous humans that walk through this door to receive an education, that's also shifting. So the number of kids who are considered to be McKinney-Vento or who are unhoused right now increased 417%. This data is actually really similar across the region. So in our 9 school districts, you actually see some really common elements, very similar to this. So I know, having been in Ithaca for so long, that Ithaca can feel really different from a Trumansburg or a South Seneca or a Newfield. But in a lot of ways, there are a lot of similarities, and we're trying to meet the needs of kids across these 9 school districts in some different ways. And boy, we could work together, right? Probably in some other ways in order to really meet their needs. Ultimately, what we're going to have is a regionalization report, and it's going to have 3 sections. Those key priority areas, say we're going to do something around transportation and, BOCES we're applying for a food infrastructure grant to support the preparation and storage and distribution of healthy foods, right? So it could have specific ideas and areas for regionalization. It'll also have very specific support requests. So we might come up with something like, hey, we don't get transportation aid back on field studies or field trips. We'd like that regulation to shift. Ultimately, the state education department needs those in order to design the legislative agenda and the funding requests for across the street from from the state education department, right? So bringing it to the governor and bringing it to state government. And then there will be some very specific actionable next steps. I'm gonna pause. I could probably talk about this for like 5 more hours, but I would love to take any questions, thoughts, ideas.
Lily, the first question that pops to my mind and has been when I read about regionalization is that I love it in theory. I love ideas here, but I fear that the state is already looking at this as cost-saving measures. In your work, are you seeing that this is something that, like, is the state looking at this as cost savings or just a way for us to utilize what we have? Because if we cut any more, of state funding.
So we're in this really interesting position. The New York State Education Department, like I said, is literally across the street from the Capitol. So the Commissioner of Education is not in the cabinet with the governor, right? We're a separate entity. So we put forward proposals and they may or may not get picked up. So when the governor indicated that foundation aid, Save Harmless, all sorts of things were going to go away, right? She was very clear about that. And she also commissioned a study, put an RFP out for organizations to do the foundation aid study that you saw that the Rockefeller Institute revealed in the beginning of December. So the New York State Education Department offered to do that study, but it would take 2 years and it would be about $1 million. The Rockefeller Institute offered to do it in less than half the time and for twice the cost. And that's what we went forward with. And then I would say within hours, the governor of that release of that report indicated that she was not interested in eliminating Save Harmless. So I'm sure you saw, her statement in relationship to that. So I'd say all of that to say, the New York State Education Department knows that the Capitol is looking at shifting funding. How do we do that in a way that's respectful of the human beings who are actually trying to do the work? I actually think this is a great solution. Yep, we have to engage in conversations. Where are we duplicating efforts? And how can we share, not even necessarily through BOCES, right? But share more in order to better meet kids' needs and also, save money.
May I ask?
Always.
It's so nice to have you at this table. And more importantly, it's nice to have you in this leadership role. And I think I'm uniquely positioned to ask this question or to make this statement. I've sat at this table as one of the longest serving superintendents in the state with multiple governors and multiple commissioners. And let me be clear, Jeff Madison and Betty Rose are two of the best leaders I've had an opportunity to work with.
I would agree.
And I've worked with the others, their predecessors. Now, I saw the time to act is now, and I've been tasked to help our community and lead this board through a lot of acting now, coming from your seat, including, I was making a list, Race to the Top, Engage New York, APPR, Culturally Responsive Frameworks, Engage New York. All things that when the folks in those two seats I mentioned shifted, we were left holding the bag. So I asked this question. I think I'm asking on behalf of all superintendents in our state and a board and a community, what's been mandated and what's not? Because I didn't hear what's been part of the law and what must we do and what is optional. Because some of these things right now, the culturally responsive and sustaining framework was some of the best work I've seen come out of the state ed department in a decade that could change the lives of young people across our state, if not the nation. And when we've pushed, and when I pushed to make sure it was at professional development and in front of every student and on every desk, when the heat and the resistance came, which we knew was inevitable, I didn't have anybody from state ed looking at me to say, no, this is mandated. So we're talking about regionalization, sharing services. We're talking about a lot of stuff that's going to, as we were seeing, is getting a lot of resistance already. A portrait of a graduate, that would change everything from standardized assessments to how we engage with families in a good way. But when we step out there and I look for state ed, what are y'all going to be doing? And what have you already been done to give us some support in these efforts that can, I've survived to many superintendents. Many superintendents have lost their jobs because of the things I mentioned earlier, including APPR. So I don't hope nobody else watches this later, but I do want.
I'm positive people will.
But I don't want to be quoted in this book clips tomorrow either. So I'm asking a genuine question about what am I going to have some cover for?
Yeah. No, I think it's a fair question.
Yeah.
And especially since what we've seen in relationship to regionalization.
Mhm.
So I heard someone say, well, Long Island did regionalize. They were really excited about it. They regionalized and hired lawyers to sue the state over it. So, and when you're receiving $500 per child in foundation aid, because you actually don't qualify for any, but that's the minimum. There's a lot of wealth that's in those areas. And folks are feeling really good about what they had in their school districts and they weren't interested in sharing. And so that's when we saw the shift to, yeah, it's optional. Because we also have districts in the state that are like, help us now. We have school districts that are tuitioning out students to high school, to a neighboring high school, because they can't afford to run a high school anymore. So we've got a really, really wide swath. We have some school districts that have 150 kids in the North Country, right? So we've got to figure out some sort of solution that addresses that. And I can understand, I wish I could predict the future and say, yes, Dr. Betty Rosa is going to stay forever. And she is going to stand her ground. I will say she is one of the smartest, strongest leaders I know. And I know she believes in this. I know we as district superintendents believe in this. And what I can promise you is that I'm going to continue to push for whatever backing we need so that our kids get what they deserve.
Now, have we done any of this on a small scale? I recall last month, the German educators were here talking about the German trip that we approved for in July, and they said that Groton used to participate. And Groton is no longer participating, I believe, because they may not have that class there. I remember some agreements we've signed where athletes may come and join here because they don't have enough students on their soccer team or lacrosse team or something like that. So is that like a small scale of that whole regionalization?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, BOCES, Mary Grover and I were talking earlier, BOCES is regionalization, right? Those are the things that we already do. We provide garbage removal for school districts. We support professional development. We support itinerant teachers. We have special education programming, P-Tech high school, et cetera, right? And there are some of our districts that are already doing some sharing. And that is through either intermunicipal agreements that their boards have voted on, or they're through some sort of informal agreement. If there's two kids that want to take calculus in the entire high school at South Seneca, they may not be able to hire a math teacher in order to teach that. But Trumansburg may already have it. And so there are some possibilities and things that people have already started. And what I think is really helpful, and at our last superintendent's meeting, I think you were traveling, but we were talking about smaller scales, exactly what you're talking about, where districts that are physically near one another may be able to share something, right? And then share out that example. I will say our region, we have really strong superintendents. We have a really good group of folks. And there's a willingness and an eagerness to try to do better for more of our kids. So they're excited to find possibilities that may seem really small in order to help build up our muscles around that kind of sharing. Did I answer your question, Karen?
Yes.
Okay.
And when you said that it could be operations focused too, and I think of this whole mandate with electric vehicles, and how would that work? Do we need to do some sort of transportation study across all TST and charging stations and located different places? And then it was brought up when Jill did the presentation on the Revenue Exploration Committee. Now, what is the financial benefit for each school? So
Yeah.
is that going to be outlined in like the process and the early stages?
Funny you should ask. A couple of weeks ago, we just got a quote for a regional transportation study to take a look at the current bus garages and systems, mechanics, routes, all sorts of things, transportation supervisors, all of those kinds of things, EV charging. We did one about 10 years ago. Not every district participated in our region. So we're looking at full participation this time around, and including some others as well. So the superintendents and I are going to talk a little more about that in January and decide what we want to do in relationship to that. It's a lot more expensive than it was years ago to do the study, but it could certainly help. So yeah, that's exactly what we're talking about.
But is this a matter, I mean, is this to the point yet where it's financial incentive to do this or a budget necessity? Like, where are we are we at the tipping point already? Because I think it's a budget necessity, not a financial incentive.
I mean, the wish, and I think for some, is that it would be both. So if Save Harmless goes away, our region stands to lose $7 million in one budget cycle. That's a lot of money. And so, yeah, for some of our school districts, we, certainly need it. And for some school districts, they want to figure out how to create a COSER or a shared service through BOCES so that they can get aid back on it the following year, so that there is a financial incentive. And I think that's where some of the regulatory changes or proposed changes could come through. So are there ways to shift aidability or some of the regulations around aid return if you're a wealthier school district versus a school district? Some of our districts get 90 cents back on the dollar, right? And others don't. So maybe we want to put out some possibilities for very specific COSERs that they shift that structure.
One of the subtle shifts I've seen this iteration versus others, and Mr. Granger was with me when we were talking about fiscal sustainability, when we talked about mergers and all those things. And what we found was no one merged, even though there was fiscal solvency on the line. I'm hearing now subtly, which I'm hoping will be much more explicit, is instructional solvency. When folks see about the offerings here in Ithaca City School District, and they are 2, 3, 4 miles away from us, and they have a significantly different experience, both instructionally and now financially, now they're raising questions about the instructional programming. And that's different. I had not heard that in previous iterations. I just hope that, but I'm also, another critique, I've had a lot of critiques. I guess since I'm an elder and an old guy now, one of my critiques has been, we started that conversation around instructional needs,
Mhm.
and it is quickly shifted to the financial one.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that we can elevate that part again for folks. Yeah,
Yeah.
with hopes that this will be different than the other ones.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, that's part of the power of superintendents attending the
Yeah.
curriculum instruction and assessment committee as opposed to just assistant superintendents and directors of curriculum. And we're trying to connect everybody to teaching and learning
Yeah.
more so at BOCES, so that we're facilitating those kinds of conversations.
Go ahead, Claire.
I was wondering, so like as a whole state, we're like interested in cross-district learning for students, right? Like sharing instruction. And so I was wondering if we would be relying on like the instruction to happen jointly over the internet or like using computers, or if we would be like transporting students across one district to another.
These are excellent questions that we don't know because we, each region or each BOCES, so there's 37 of the Board of Cooperative Educational Service or BOCES. And each of those 37 plans is going to look different.
So would it be potentially the case that we'd have one nearby district? Let's assume they had a class that we didn't, or we had a class that they didn't, that we would be somehow sharing students across those two districts for this one class if there was enough interest or something like that?
Potentially. So those are some of the ideas that some folks have floated. You know, Ithaca doesn't have an ag program, right? And yet a number of our neighboring, the neighboring school districts do. There's a fabulous STEAM center that's already built in Groton where kids have access to a number of different career-oriented learning experiences that are a lot more fluid. I know here in Ithaca, you all are building a STEAM or STEM center and might be able to create something like that. But those are the kinds of opportunities that are really innovative and really exciting. And I think those are some of the sharing opportunities that more folks, honestly, Caedmon, can kind of get behind, as opposed to, okay, we're going to share a very traditional geometry program and we're all sitting and doing a traditional geometry program. Although, who knows what that will create. Again, they're going to be through, the plan development is going to be through convenings of our region, our communities. So the people doing it actually will decide.
So last question from me, hopefully then, Lily. So hearing this then, putting the financial cynicism that I am bringing to the table aside.
Realism.
Yeah, thank you for this. That's the painful part. But so I guess looking for the hopefulness of this, there is a lot of opportunity. So things from like arts and sports and outdoor rec and all sorts of, is it kind of like do we have an opportunity to shape this then if we start getting in now as a
Yes.
district?
Totally.
Okay. And what would you then recommend as someone who's on the ground floor, we as a board start thinking about in using this to our advantage?
I would say when the invitation arrives, show up for the convenings, contribute your thinking to the collective.
Any other board comments or questions? Okay, well, a lot to take in and think about. Thank you so much for coming tonight, presenting.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, our next item of business tonight, item 10.2, cell phones in schools update. We're going to bring down Mary Grover and Carrie Burke.
Gladly.
Hi, good evening. My name is Carrie Burke. I'm Director of Health Services and Wellness for the district.
Good evening, Mary Grover, Assistant Superintendent of Teaching and Learning. Thanks for having us. All right, so we're going to frame how any potential shifts in cell phone use, what's happening, and the impacts to teaching and learning. So next slide, Tricia.
Oh, where's the,
Oh, it's here. Awesome. Thank you. I get to drive. That doesn't happen much.
this is a timely topic, as many of you know. One of the reasons that we're here talking about this today is that the governor this summer went on a statewide listening tour on this very issue, collecting feedback from stakeholders in districts and in the community, students, parents, and educators around the issue of cell phones and their impact on youth mental health and well-being.
So late August, this past school year, we decided to convene representatives from every union leadership, and some school board members attended to talk about what this legislation means for us insofar as what brings us hope about it. And so some of the collective thinking on that was about increased opportunities to connect with students, face-to-face communication, the partnership that this conversation could lead to with students, staff, caregivers, reviewing some of the research on mental health. Those were some of the topics that surfaced. We also discussed as a collective what brings us concern. And so some of the things that surfaced were the use of cell phones as far as supporting universal student needs. We have students using these for everything from medical issues, students and staff. And that was something that rose to the top fairly quickly that I hadn't thought about before. The other concerns that came were, well, what would this mean for starting and greeting students? So what kind of structures or supports would be needed so we don't welcome students to a classroom and starting with conflict? An approach that wouldn't result in increased discipline or disproportionate suspensions of students. And then another comment around caregiver access and wanting to be able to connect with their children, and the need of emergency. And so here's where we're landing right now in subsequent meetings. One, we're really looking at how our own personal experience and approach might impact how we're looking at this and how do we want this to end? Who isn't at the table that needs to be, and how the issue might be affecting them. And then some things that surface, for example, in communications, we set out a communication earlier this year referencing a Snapchat threat. And the question we got most back was, what's Snapchat? So that's a feedback loop that illustrates an opportunity to have conversations with caregivers about what's on phones, how kids are using phones. One thing I really appreciate, Catherine talks a lot, Catherine Sanera talks a lot about the culture of accessibility that we've all grown really used to. And that's surfacing in our conversations as well.
Sharing a quote with you here from the governor, hearing from young people and educators will allow us to develop effective solutions to address this mental health crisis, deliver results for our kids in school. So as we mentioned, the governor has completed a listening tour over the summer, continues to meet with stakeholder groups. I think this is instructive too, in part of our desire to move forward, our desire to center the voices of students, caregivers, and staff in considering what ultimately a district policy might be on this topic. To that end, and this is a very long quote, but essentially what the governor signaled is her desire to go big, to introduce a statewide policy. So if you've been following the news at all, there are currently 19 states that have some sort of either restriction or outright ban or requirement that school districts have a policy. So it really varies. What this sort of indicates or signals that the government is not going to leave it up to districts to themselves to decide whether or not to have a policy. How far she may go with it is not clear. I'll be paying close attention to future communications, including the state of the state in January. But it doesn't seem like this is an issue that's going away, or that she has an interest in. She certainly has expressed interest in moving forward on. So with that said, we would like to engage in a similar process. We want to create multiple opportunities, venues, and channels for people to provide their insights, to provide their input on current state, future state, concerns, to elevate those voices of persons who are otherwise maybe not at the table. We are putting a prompt in our ICSD Insider to invite comment. We've tagged or created a featured topic on our Let's Talk page specifically around the cell phone policy. We foresee an opportunity to collaborate with our PTAs and community groups to organize forums for listening, for feedback. And we're also looking to add questions to our annual end of the year survey, which is sent to and completed by caregivers, students, and staff alike, which presents, again, a unique opportunity, presuming we have more information from what the governor intends to do, to help shape future policy. I would point to this guide. I just want to reference this guide. Was published earlier this month by the U.S. Department of Education. Is a wonderful, wonderful resource, and we've been poring over it in our conversations and discussions about this very topic.
So here's just a brief snapshot of what exists and where we are right now. So at the beginning of the year, we did some information sessions with administrators that they could use with their communities at their opening conversations around Custodio, which is an app that every device is on. So parents receive a report when students are using a school device on where they're spending time, and they can register for free their student's personal device if they wish. So that's one structure that exists. Engaging curriculum. We thank our educators for creating project-based learning opportunities and the other ways that they're getting student input on the lessons, learning opportunities they facilitate. We also have talking circles and restorative justice work specifically around cell phone policy, and the Let's Talk portal for people to give us input.
Mm-hmm.
In the middle column, you're going to see a link to communications that have gone out to community members at Boynton, DeWitt, Ithaca High School. You see examples of what's happening right now. And then further collaboration with the parent and teacher associations and our ICSD communication team. The document that Carrie referenced is one that we're pouring over to work with the policy committee on drafting something that's going to work for our community. I would also add in a shout out to thank you, Karen, for sharing those resources this afternoon, and Aaron, the letter that went out with the TST Board Association and that collective approach is we have a draft and one similar to go out, and the slide deck you shared, I'll add onto this slide from other districts who've navigated this. All right, what questions do you have?
I just have one. So if the governor makes a policy that would kind of supersede anything that we would do as a school district, like if
Yes. And we have the opportunity to implement it, and I think have an opportunity right now to inform and dictate what that could look like.
Mhm.
Because even the practices that we've seen, so some of the practices, for example, at Boynton and DeWitt and speaking with the building leaders, said we've seen a reduction in discipline referrals, specifically related to cell phones, just simply about asking students to put them away, collaborating with caregivers and talking about it.
I may have missed it. Where is that information that you collected about what's happening at the schools right now?
Oh, it's in that system structures and sustainability, the middle column. It's hyperlinked in the middle column on the first. It's a folder with the communications.
I would just say one more thing. I was at, at least one of the meetings where we were sort of talking about, all of the different, I guess, hopes and concerns. I like that
Yeah.
terminology. I don't really have an answer to this, and I don't expect anybody to have the answer to this. I'm just sort of interested, that when we're choosing the policy, it's really a big part of that is choosing which criteria to center when we're making the policy, because just going to one of those meetings and hearing all the different perspectives and hearing all of the different reasons, to do it or to not do it. I think the interesting part is going to be sort of which criteria are going to sort of rise to the top to orient the direction of the policy, because there's so many ways that it could go. So I think that's going to be a big question and may be helpful in the conversation, but trying to figure out like what are the top priorities as opposed to trying to include everything. Because I was looking at the last thing where it said like creating a policy that works for everyone, which I feel like would be amazing. But I think probably some people will really like certain aspects of it. Some people won't. So anyway, I'm just kind of interested to see the direction that it goes in, but I recognize the complexity. And I think having participated in some of the conversations, I would only just say that the complexity becomes more clear as you talk more about it with different people. Whereas I think people come into I came into the conversation on a certain side, and by the time I left the conversation, I felt like, oh wow, yeah, I'm not sure now. So just wanted to make that comment.
I think we're going to benefit too from the fact that you have sort of this like natural experiment playing out across these 19 states. So in the months ahead, I'm anticipating more reporting or maybe even more research about what's working and what's not working. I would say in that playbook that the Department of Education published, there was a case study in there of a school district that had a policy, and then over the course of the school year engaged in these iterative processes to figure out, do we need to change it? What's different? So I think to that end too, knowing that we may pursue a certain direction, allowing ourselves the possibility of revisiting and making changes based on where things stand.
I think it's important too, that as a board and when we're talking to the community about this, something that works for everyone isn't necessarily everyone's preference. And I've even have to shift my own views as a board member, right? I personally wish there were no phones in schools at all because it's so distracting, but that there are other people's needs that need to be considered, and this is hard work doing that. And the harder thing takes more time.
And the slide deck that I shared this afternoon with Mary and Carrie is the same slide deck I shared with the board, my colleagues, after Erin and I went to NISBA's convention in October. And it was a slide of a school that said that their best policy included input from the students. They weren't the caregivers, yes, they wanted it provided input, and they did hear from the caregivers, but they need to buy-in, especially from secondary students, that they are involved in the process to make sure the cell phone is this policy is adhered to. And with regard to the governor, that's why Erin and I are on TST BOCES School Board Association, and the group of representatives from school boards throughout TST signed a letter to the governor, to Assemblymember Kellis, to Senator Webb, just saying, make sure it's localized, that each school district can provide an input into their policy. not a mandate, because we know where the mandates go at times and the impact that has on us.
Thank you for the presentation. Can we talk a little bit about timeline? Because this is also, collecting information. We could do it forever also. And there also is, we know that there is to some degree urgency. I think almost certainly the majority of the policy committee meetings have had one to several members of the community come and speak about it. And we've certainly have received a lot of emails. So how can we both balance the very important need of getting feedback from all members of the community, students, families, educators, et cetera, and, assure folks that we aren't going to be doing in that stage forever, and kind of what those next steps might be like, or what deadlines we might be kind of setting for ourselves.
I don't want to predict the future or make any declarations, but I have some degree of confidence that the governor will determine that timeline in part, as to when districts either have to develop a policy or begin implementing one that the state hands down. So I think some of that will be out of our control. That being said, there are opportunities to potentially do things sooner rather than later. I was sharing with Mary earlier, one of the districts we were reading about enacted like a 2-week ban, as a trial, as a pilot, to sort of suss out any concerns or issues, to hone their communications. So there are certainly things we could look at to do this year in advance or preparation of a future policy implementation. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I would add, we can add a specific timeline to the slide deck. This is a good question. And that I foresee a concentration of getting student and caregiver input in January and February, with making some recommendations in March.
That's great. That's very helpful. I appreciate that. And I think, while mandates do come down from the governor and can feel sudden, it also, this district likes to tout itself as being kind of ahead of the curve. And so we also, I think that they might also be sending down a mandate for districts who haven't even begun to have these conversations. And so I think it's great. And I really appreciate all of the work that both of you and others are doing to collect that now, and just look forward to kind of continue having it move regardless of what comes down from the state. But really, really appreciate the work that you're doing.
Any other comments, questions? Thank you very much for joining us and for the presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, moving into the tail end of our agenda, we have item 10.4, the appointment of records management officer, and I will entertain motions.
Motion to appoint District Treasurer Emily Scheib, Records Management Officer of the Ithaca City School District, Ithaca, New York, for the 2024-25 fiscal year.
Second.
Moved by Emily, seconded by Jill with a delayed reaction, second by Todd. Any discussion, comments, questions?
Just a discussion that we've discussed this at the Finance Committee last week, and also this was part of the whole reorganization. And since there's been a change in the business office, that's why we're appointing Emily.
Okay, thanks. Hearing no additional discussion, we could move it to a vote. All in favor? It passes unanimously. Okay, moving over to item 11, other business. We have 11.1, some upcoming dates of importance. We have our next full board voting meeting on January 14th, 2025. January 7th coming up, we have a policy meeting at 5 and a human resources meeting at 6. Of course, we have a long break coming up from for the next several days. Last day will be Friday from school. Coming back on January 2nd, in case people don't know that. Any other important dates that I'm forgetting? Okay, moving to item 11.2, other discussion items. Hearing no discussion items, we can move to adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much for attending, and we will see you in the new year. Whoa.